Hello, this is Will Faerber from Art to Ride, and today we're going to catch up with Bailador here a little bit and show you how we are approaching solving the problem of his canter. Now, Bailador is a horse who's had a long history of a sore back, and what we found was we'd get him going pretty good in the trot, and as soon as we tried to canter the horse, he'd immediately get sore in the back again. We'd practically be right back to where we started. His problem was every time he would start the canter, he'd throw his head way back and literally just crack his back downward, which of course would make his back hurt even more, and then react to that and kind of have one of his spasms, so to speak. So what we've done with the chambon, as we showed you with the last lesson with him, is how we've gotten him working the chambon, and how the chambon has helped him to stay out in front of his self, so to speak, with his neck instead of shortening it back up like you see there. See how he's beginning to stretch into the contact. So remember that all horses should stretch in all three gaits, but it's even more important with one like this, who was stuck in this kind of vicious circle, so to speak, of recreating an action every time he tried to canter that would end up with his back sore. So, and even when we first saw this horse jumping, we saw a video of the sales tape of this horse, and it's no wonder he'd had a sore back. He literally would come up to these 3-foot, 3-6 fences and stop, and then jump straight off of all 4 feet and land in a heap on the other side of every fence. So I'm sure that's where the beginnings of his sore back began. But we've come a long way now with him. He's stretching nicely out into the contact of the neck. You can see here in the canter, he's now keeping the neck out in front of him when we canter. As I said, as opposed to every time we would canter, he would throw the head back into his body and just drop his back right out from underneath you. So now what we're going to do is go back all the way to the beginning with him. So I'm warming him up on the lunge line here, and then what I'm going to do in a few minutes once I've warmed up both sides is I'm going to put my associate trainer Amber Matusik on the horse, who of course weighs much less than me by about 40 pounds. So, and don't forget that weight does matter when it comes to these things. You may simply have a horse that simply back is just not developed enough to be able to carry your weight, and that's something that you need to be able to recognize. And once again, that's why it's so important to race horses. The matter of a pound or a half a pound can make the difference in a horse winning a race or not. So don't ever think that which is like so many people do, that horses are just big and strong and they can do all these things and carry any amount of weight. Well, they cannot. And of course, once they get sore like this horse had become, and especially hung in a vicious circle as he was, where he just kept getting sore every time you'd canter him. He'd pull his neck back into his body, drop his back, and then the next day he wouldn't be able to walk practically. So we went through this numerous times with him. So once again, now I'm going back to the very beginning, as you see here in the canter. Once again, he's stretching out nicely in the neck. Nice round canter. Now once again, look how, even though his neck is out in front of him, how lifted the forehand is and how nicely uphill this canter actually is, even though his neck is out ahead of him. Once again, that's the neck is only a symptom of whatever is happening with the rest of the horse. So once again, we must get over this idea of thinking that you have to pull the horse's head up in the air to get it off its forehand, because just the opposite is what occurs. When you pull the horse's head up beyond the point at which it has strength to hold your back, it's going to drop his back and it's on his forehand no matter what you do. So once again, look how nicely he's keeping his neck out and long, and believe me, this has taken a lot of work. I tried to do this with this horse early on in his training with the chambon, but he was just too explosive to be able to deal with it. I felt that he'd probably flip over or something. I tried it a few times, but was not happy with the result. So, it took all this time to get to the point. Now he's very happy in that. As you can see, he's getting in that place where his ears are just floppy and totally relaxed, and that's exactly what I'm looking for. So same here again. We come back to the trot. And just letting him stretch out, and just look how easy and floaty this trot is. He's not hanging on the bridle at all. He's just stretching down. The hocks are keeping a really nice soft action to them. And once again, look how long the neck is out in front of me. Exactly what I'm looking for there. So he's not shortening back. And you see him do it a little bit. This way he's a little harder than the other side. You can see how it kind of sucks back a little bit. But once again, this is a huge improvement over what we've seen in the past, and he's just the fact that he's willing to stay out there. So that's been the beauty of the chambon with this horse once I could work with it, because he's always been, sort of caught in these actions that have become just automatic with him, that he does without thinking, and these same, actions, that is throwing his head up in the air and cracking his back down, leads to him being sore in the back. And as I said, he's just kind of stuck in this cycle of this, where his actions are creating his own problems, but he's too mentally upset to be able to deal with it. But as you see here now, he's nice and relaxed and stretching into that contact, just what I'm looking for, and how easily he goes back into the canter there again. Keeps the neck out in front of him. That's just what I'm looking for. And once again, look how nice and uphill that canter actually is. Whereas every time I've tried to canter him before, the canter was always this very choppy. You felt like he was digging a hole to China with his front legs instead of coming up and lifting you, because of course he was disuniting his back end so much. So once again, see how easily he goes into that. Now it's also, he would also explode. Every time you asked him to canter, he'd throw the head straight in the air and there'd be a moment of explosion. So, for him, this is the nicest I've ever seen him canter, and just coming out and just being pleasant, staying out there and being able to do that on the lunge line. So once again, as in all things, the horse is never going to be better with you on them than he is from the ground. So, what I saw right there is exactly what I'm looking for before I'd ever put a rider. Because even looking at this horse standing there in silhouette, you can see how there's still a dip behind the saddle there. He still has a ways to go before it's going to be perfect. So I'm taking him in each direction a couple of times just to give him plenty of chance to warm up. Be sure everything is swinging and active. And once again, giving him plenty of time to get the back swinging and active and warmed up before I put the weight up there. And once again, for a horse like this, just to go around the circle, once again, it took about 2 years just to get this horse to go around a circle and just stay there and stay relaxed all the way around one circle. He would fixate on one little spot somewhere and just over and over and over again, throw his head straight in the air every time that you came around that point. So just to see him go around like this, rather floppy-eared and nice and relaxed, and once again, see that nice big rolling canter. He's swinging over his back beautifully. The neck is stretching down into it. Exactly what I'm looking for right there. Look how nice and even the hocks are, swinging and active, and yet totally relaxed. And look how much flexion in the hocks. Once again, right into that stretch in the canter. That's exactly what I'm looking for. And notice I only do the canter for a few strides, a few circles, that is. I'd never hold him in the canter for more than a few times around like you see me doing here. That's about it, and I'm right back into it again. Because remember, horses don't learn from doing more of something. That's kind of a mentality that we have to get out of our minds, that, if something's worth doing once, it's worth doing 100 times. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. And that was a nice improvement. So by stretching and doing it a couple of times, I was able to get him really long and swinging. And now what I've done is I put my associate trainer, Amber Matusik, up here. Because once again, with this horse, it's just getting him used to having somebody on him without overreacting to everything. Because he was like, as soon as you got on him, he was expecting his back to hurt, throw his head up in the air, and pretty soon he was camel walking, this kind of thing. So we've come a long way in the sense of, how far we've come with him. So if we can just get over the hurdle of the canter, I think we'll be well on our way to having a horse that will have many, many years to come. So once again, we go back to just what we started with, just a good stretch in the trot. And once again, for him, this is lovely just to come out and stretch down. He's not looking for anything to get excited about. His horse is finally learning that, the work is not going to hurt him. So he's able to stretch down into the contact. And that's exactly what we're looking for him to do. Just nice swinging along with his tail, staying out there ahead of him, carrying himself. Now notice once again how relaxed that chambon is. It isn't doing anything at all when the horse is in this position. So with him, it's only going to do something if he throws his head straight up in the air, which of course was his problem. Now, as I said, unfortunately in the beginning he was too reactive. We had to do a lot of calming down to get him to the point where he could, accept that level of confinement, which the chambon does to a certain degree with the pressure over the pole. So once again, how nice and slow that canter is, and see how he did not shorten the neck back into his body. Now I'm having her sit in a little bit of a two-point position, just a little bit forward with her shoulders, keeping her weight in her heels a little bit, in other words, so I'm not putting very much weight on the saddle at all. I want her to stay as light as possible. And once again, yes, it does make a difference. And if you have a horse that's had a sore back, we have to be very, very careful as we build these muscles back. Because unfortunately, just like a person, who's gone into rehab, it takes quite a while, to get over that hump where things still kind of hurt, and you have to, and they're tender, and you have to work around that. And that's what a person does in rehab. I've injured many of my fingers actually, and my knees a couple of times, and I've never had surgery. I've just slowly worked them back in until I got everything working correctly again by just doing the right thing. So far, so good. But once again, the horse is the same way. So we want to work everything as correctly as possible we can here, and how beautiful and stretched and relaxed this is. And this is just a big part of this horse just knowing he can come out and go along for a while and, come out and do a lesson or a session and have fun, that it's not going to turn into something painful for him. And once again, how nice the canter is there. Just goes into a nice swinging canter over his back, exactly what we're looking for. He's not freaking out. He's not jumping in the air. Every other time I've ever cantered this horse before, he would kind of leap into the canter, whether it was doing it from a walk or whether you're doing it from a trot, the same thing would happen. He'd kind of leap into it and throw his head up in the air and throw his neck back at you in the body, and of course drop his back. So how beautiful that is, and just nice and relaxed, no change of rhythm. This is what I'm looking for. Just get this horse in the zone. That's always been his problem. And it isn't any fun to ride a horse who's not in the zone. Once you get a horse that trained correctly, and you realize how wonderful it is to get on these animals and they just kind of lock into what you're doing, and you can flow along like music. I mean, this looks very rhythmic, and that's exactly what it should look like. When you see people who are constantly stopping, or constantly stopping and rein back, even worse. It's just very annoying to the horse to keep doing that. And of course, that's the whole project, is to get the horse to be a willing participant in all of that. That was the whole idea of dressage, that dressage was the sport that everyone else could look up to, as here's where you could aspire to this, if you were willing to study hard enough, and and once again, and how this would affect in a good way everything else you might want to do with the horse in terms of jumping or anything else you want to do. How much better to be on a horse that's physically fit, balanced on all four legs, and mentally sane, than being out one who's not any of those things, which I've seen many people do, and many people get hurt in the process. So once again, getting to this point is really what we're looking for. I mean, once I get this with a horse where I can just come out and he's just locking in like you see him doing here, and nothing is changing. I'm not having to do very much at all. He's just getting into the position that's comfortable for him, coming along, and once again, being able to make these canter transitions without throwing his head up in the air, without making a big deal about it or leaping in the air once again. So I feel like we're quite over the hump with him in this sense, and what I will do now over weeks to come here is just gradually build the weight till we put the weight on the saddle. So once again, I just don't want to take that chance, because we've just seen it too many times with this horse. You try to do much canter, and it just wasn't working that way. So we needed to take a step back, and once again we needed to correct this basically autonomic reflex of his, of thinking that the canter, and certainly, as I said, you could see if you had seen the videos of him jumping, you would have seen how the horse could have had nothing but a sore back the way he was going about doing it, literally stopping in front of every fence and then popping up over it, and and some rather heavy person landing in the middle of his back on the other side. So you can imagine where his problems began. And once again, as we've said many times, he's a wonderful horse with a wonderful temperament. So I think if we solve the problem of what's always been causing him so much discomfort, I think he's going to turn into as lovely to ride as he is to groom, which is a good thing. So once again, that was absolutely beautiful, exactly what I was looking for there. Notice how easy that was, time and time again. There was no change. So now we come back and try the same thing on the other side. Now the left side has always been the more difficult side with him. So if we're able to achieve the same kind of length and stretch through the neck, we will know that we were well underway. But once again, something to keep notice, things that I look at. Once again, when you see the horse in silhouette there, you see how there's still a little dip behind that saddle that comes up to his hip bone. That still needs to go away. That's a sign of a weak back. Once again, he's come a long way from what he was. But that's still got a hole that's got to come up there quite a bit before you're going to say, okay, well, this horse is 100%, ready to go, so to speak. You have to think of horses as like, you're building a car. You wouldn't go out, if you were building your own car, I would hope, and not try to drive it around the city before you put brakes on it, or before you even had tires on it. Well, people do that with horses, and that's how they get into so much trouble, and of course how the horses end up so so lame so often, because they're, once again, as I said, they're trying to go take the honeymoon cruise before the car has actually got any wheels on it, so or then certainly not any shock absorbers. Because remember, that's the point of all this. So once again, if you look at this horse, you see how evenly he's working his hocks now. He's able to stretch in that perfect position right there over his back, and that's exactly where I want him to stay. And there's no change in the rhythm, once again, and there's no change in his mental attitude. If you'd seen him early in his career, you'd just seen that every time, you would try to go into the canter, you could just see him, beginning to pin his ears back and grind his teeth, and away it would go. So, this is the nicest we have ever seen him be able to canter. And once again, see how that pole did not come up. And once again, the chambon can do wonders for this kind of horse. And it's the only device that we use, and it's the only thing I recommend. It's, any of the other kind of devices that attempt to do the same thing really don't, and they usually have some kind of ill effect along the way, like the rigs that have ropes that go around the back of the horse's legs and, you know, tie the front end to the back end. That's never a good idea. As I said, you know, if you knew how to lunge, you wouldn't need one. If you don't know how to lunge, you're probably going to do a lot of damage to your horse in the process. So once again, beautiful canter here. So how he strides forward, doesn't change the rhythm, and once again, the ears aren't pinned back. He's staying nice and beautifully stretched into the contact. So by doing this, we're able to just slowly build his weight up and build the muscle up under his back, and I'm sure that we'll be able to keep him going for a long time to come. So in other words, I think we finally have a method here that's going to work if we can just stay on track and keep everything happening the way it is now. And once again, notice how easily he comes all the way back down into that stretch. And how much different the stretch is here with him than it used to be. If you'd seen this horse stretching a year ago or two, you know, you'd have seen he was very extremely broken in the neck. So he really, you know, you've got to remember with all of these kind of horses, if they've been overflexed in the neck, it's going to take at least a year just to heal that. So just know that when you start out. And once again, the chambon is the best way to go because you really can't use side reins on those kind of horses because as soon as you put side reins on, they just take any pressure at all and they crank behind the bridle, and you know, because they already have a crink in their neck. So once again, the chambon is a much better way to go. Once again, unless the horse is super sensitive like this one was and overreactive to the pole pressure. I had to wait a while until I solved some other problems before I could do that with him here. But once again, how easily he comes back to the canter and just rolling along. That's exactly what I'm looking for. We're not making any big deal of it, just out for a nice canter. So this is the most canter that we've ever been able to get him to sustain. And once again, on this particular day, he has never once shortened the neck back into his body and shown me any of the behavioral habits that led to these problems in the past. So this is Will Faerber from Art to Ride. I hope that helps. We look forward to seeing you next time. And once again, there's always an answer out there relative to the classical principles if you look for them. Thank you so much.